Okay, hey everybody. I am finally got my technology where it needed to be. So, thank you for coming in and seeing my update on the recent legislation. So, for those of you who have been following, it's been a long, long time that we have been waiting for some sort of additional stimulus package, for some sort of just clarifications and it's been a while. So we've been waiting for almost 6 months, I think, for additional legislation to come through, and of course, politics with the election seem to get in the way, as well as there's so many factors going on with COVID and the vaccine and the economy and all of the things. And so finally, over the weekend, we got some clarification. We got a bill that is been passed by the House, passed by the Senate, and is waiting to be signed. And of course, if you were in my living room last night, you heard the giant groan that was almost a scream when my husband told me that it may not be signed by the president and that it was being kicked back. And I was like, no, you've got to be kidding me. However, it is all just political drama at this point. Something has definitely been passed, and the things that are in the bill that are somewhat contentious are not the things that are going to impact small businesses that I think those are going to stay. And so that's why I wanted to go ahead and come on here and talk to you about it, because it is one of those things where we have been so late in getting this information that it has been very, very difficult in this last quarter to make plans to help clients be able to figure out what they should expect tax wise. And with the late date of the legislation being passed, it's going to really extend the beginning of tax season, because whenever they pass late legislation, it is almost inevitable that tax forms will need to be changed. There will be tax laws and instructions that are going to be rewritten that impact the coming tax season. So typically in our firm, we would start working on business tax returns in early February. We'd be closing the month in January and really getting those returns rolling, because many of them are due in mid-March. Right now, I mean, it's going to be delayed. There was already changes from the CARES Act earlier this year that impacted tax forms that are going to be filed. But then there's also things that are in this piece of legislation that is also going to impact things. So it's also been very difficult to plan. What is someone's tax liability going to be? Hard to say, because of the way some of the earlier legislation was worded and then interpreted and then clarified. It was sounding like there was going to be tax implications relating to some of this funding that was received in regards to the PPP loans, in the EIDL grants. All of these things were going to become taxable events. And that's what we had to plan for. That is really absolutely how we had to tax plan. And unfortunately, and fortunately, it's changed. So, what I just wanted to talk to you briefly about today is the changes that will impact small businesses. I'm not so much going to talk about things like the pieces that affect unemployment. I'm not going to talk about necessarily the stimulus money that is going to be released, except to say, don't expect to see any of that until 2021. I do not expect that any of the current bill says 600. It's being pushed back to try to make it be more. I don't think any of that you will see until 2021. So don't start bugging anybody to find out where it is and why you haven't gotten it yet. So back to the business pieces of it. a lot of this stuff has come through exactly how we hoped it would. We really just hoped it would have come through, 4 or 5 months ago instead of right here at the last minute. So, number one in my world is PPP forgiveness. So, people have been frantically getting into applying for their forgiveness. Some banks are open, some banks are not accepting forgiveness yet. There's plenty of time to apply for it. So the rule and clarification that came out is that you have 10 months essentially from the date that you finished spending the money. And that would be either an 8-week period or a 24-week period. So that being said, you have plenty of time. You wouldn't really need to be applying until 10 months later, which puts almost everybody in 2021, if not everybody. Some people have applied and gotten forgiveness already, and that's great. But what the trick was that it said, okay, well, we're not going to tax you on the PPP forgiveness, but you aren't going to be able to deduct the expenses that the PPP paid for. And what that did for people is to say, okay, well, ultimately that PPP forgiveness becomes taxable, just in a more complicated way, in having to go back and say, okay, how much payroll did we use? How much rent did we use? How much, and back that out for tax purposes. Very complicated and not really the intent of how it was designed. So now they're saying the expenses are deductible. The forgiveness is not income and the expenses are deductible. So really you are getting a bump here in being able to get the money for free and deduct the expenses. That's what we all wanted. Unfortunately, for people who've already had tax plans done and information went to your tax preparer and they worked up, how much you're going to owe, there was it could be a very big chunk of income that had to be included in your income at the time of the plans. And now it doesn't have to be included. So that means if you got a plan and they said, oh, you're going to owe money, expect that you're going to owe less. So that for me that is the biggest piece, because that for most people is the biggest amount of money that they received, is this PPP forgiveness. So I mean, I've had clients anywhere from $5,000 or $10,000 that they got for PPP to millions. And so I mean, it is one of those things where it has a huge impact and greatly impacts the tax situation and the tax preparation. So that I'm so excited about. That was a piece I was very much hoping for. The second piece, and I've been cautioning my clients for really months on this, is that the way they wrote up the PPP loan forgiveness was that if you received the EIDL advance, which was that $10,000 that really ended up only being $1,000 per employee, maxed at 10, that from your forgiveness that you applied for, you had to deduct that. So you were going to be short $1,000 to $10,000 that you were going to end up having to pay back as a PPP loan. And that was one of those things where you're like, well, wow, those things weren't really related. And you really didn't have any control over whether or not you received that $10,000 or increment of that, because if you applied for the EIDL, you had the opportunity to ask for this fast cash in advance with really no explanation at the time. You were really working blind, but knowing that the pandemic was here, we were going to be shut down, we were going to end up being really in an economic slump, and you don't know how long it's going to last. Everybody applied for it. Everybody said, yeah, give me $10,000 ahead of time. Not knowing that later, when they finally got through the PPP application process, that they were going to end up having to pay that money back. So that was not intended. This legislation eliminates that. So I had cautioned my clients on, if you're going to apply for forgiveness, you might want to wait until we know about this, because we knew it was kind of floating around in the various legislative packages that had been introduced to Congress. So now it doesn't have to be subtracted off your PPP forgiveness, and it doesn't have to be included in income. So it's also not going to be treated like a grant. So what does that mean? For the people who already applied and had that subtracted from their PPP, Give it a few weeks, but then reach out to your bank and find out how you get the rest of that forgiven, because it is supposed to be retroactive for the people who have already applied for forgiveness and gotten forgiveness. Those people had it deducted, and now they have this loan anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000 sitting on their books. So, really, what that means is, we're going to, instead of having it treated as a loan, we're going to move it back over to the profit and loss statement, but we're not going to have to be taxed on it. So, I think that's another really, really big point that I think, from a tax perspective and a tax planning perspective, is the biggest help they can give to small businesses right now, short of giving more funding or people qualifying for more funding. So, those two pieces we have been waiting for so long. I mean, it really has been. I have not completed and submitted a single application for any of my clients that I'm assisting them with because of those two pieces. I didn't want there to be a chance that people applied and they ended up having that grant and it was not forgiven, and that it wasn't retroactive and those people were just stuck. They ended up having to pay it back, but people who applied later didn't have to. So I'm glad I waited so that we have more clarification. And for those people who have already applied and they're sitting with this amount on their books, or if they've already paid it back, you're going to have to reach out to your banks. The other thing with your bank is there's not any information on this legislation yet. The guidance can't be written until it's been signed. And the guidance is what is going to give the banks the information they need to figure out how to proceed with the forgiveness. There's going to be updated applications, and there is going to be another round of PPP available. So right now, no matter what information is coming from your bank, I can almost guarantee they don't really know. So the banks I've worked with that I think are the most helpful are the ones that are not pushing on you to do these things, because there's no hurry. There was no hurry to get to forgiveness. There was no hurry, to figure this out because of the guidance that said you have 10 months, but there were still banks saying, hey, you got to start paying this back. No, not the case. So I would suggest give it a few weeks. We need to wait until it's actually been signed by the president. Then they will start preparing guidance and forms and things, which I'm sure are already in the works, but it will take a few weeks, and we have some holidays in here. So it's also going to slow down the process, but just don't be worried about it. So a couple other pieces relating to the PPP. One is there's going to be a simplified form for forgiveness for the PPP loans that were $150,000 and less. So you still have to do calculations, but you may not have to have them as complicated of a form. We just don't know. And in all cases, you need to keep and retain all of the backup you used for your calculations and for the process of coming up with your numbers and your forgiveness amounts. The calculations for showing that you used payroll, at least 60% was for payroll, that the other expenses were qualified expenses, those types of things. So just know that there's another form coming. Again, glad I didn't get too far ahead of it. I mean, I have been working behind the scenes on filling in a lot of things, but I have not actually completed a bunch of the applications, hoping that they would actually come through with something a little bit simpler. Because while I have some clients that got more than 150,000, most of the loans were less than 150,000. So they're trying to take the burden off of the business in having to get those prepared because they're complex. And, most accountants really can't afford, especially this time of year, to just say, yeah, let me do that for you for free, because we really don't have any idea of how long these things are going to take. They're new, depending on what type of payroll system you use. Any of these things can have an impact on getting that form completed. And so it was becoming cost prohibitive for these businesses to have these. They need to get the forgiveness, but then did they? Because it was going to be taxable anyway. And then they also had to pay to get it done. And so they're trying to simplify that. And now that we know for sure it's not going to be taxable, yeah, you need to apply for the forgiveness. You don't need to have that loan out there, and so that's good news too. Another thing is there's going to be another round of PPP available. There's going to be some restrictions there, and it is going to be based essentially on economic decline in your business. So, what they're saying is you need to show that you've had at least a 25% decline in revenues in any of the last 4 quarters compared to that same quarter in the prior year. And so everybody's like, okay, does this apply to sole proprietors? Yeah, it applies to everybody. It's going to be the same calculation of 2.5 times your payroll costs, a 1 month's payroll costs, based on either 2019 or 2020. And so you're going to have, most people are not going to be able to use 2020 numbers necessarily because you're not going to be ready. You're not going to have a full set of books. And again, the process for applying for these is not going to start until we've gotten something signed. So the banks also don't know. And we also, they're not going to be able to tell you things like, if you already got a PPP, we're not giving you another one. They can't tell you that unless you're forgiven, we can't give you another one. They don't know any of that yet. They know as much as everybody else. This bill was almost 6,000 pages. And a lot of it is part of the omnibus package that they have to pass to keep the government running through next September that had been delayed for so long because of, political drama and meanderings through the election. So they had to pass something anyway. So there's a lot of stuff in there that has nothing to do with COVID-19. It has nothing to do with the stimulus. It's nothing. It's just keeping the government running and funding a lot of those programs. So there's a lot of stuff in there that isn't going to apply. And some of that may be where there's some contention that is going to keep the president from signing, but most of it is not. I mean, most of it, the things that I'm talking to you about today are not contentious. That I believe. I think they're going to pass it anyway. So the PPP, again, it's going to be available. There's going to be essentially this would be round 3. You would be able to use it for a few more things. So still would need to use 60% of it for payroll costs. Rent is still in there, but there's also going to be some more operating expenses. There's going to be things relating to PPE that you might have needed to do, or changes to your business to comply with COVID-19 regulations. There's some things relating to, software, things that you need in your business. So I mean, there's definitely some more to it. And I would say that if you are in the position where you know that you've had a decline and you can prove that you had at least a 25% decline in a quarter compared to a prior quarter, that you might want to, find out as quickly as possible once they open this and they have the guidance on who can get it and who can't more directly defined, then you want to get on that very quickly. So because it's a PPP and it's going to follow the same guidelines of being forgiven. So they're going, and that's the best thing that can happen for small business right now, is that they continue down this path of providing the funds and then giving them a break for using the funds appropriately. And that's, going to be able to help more small businesses as you go. There's also a bigger provision for certain NICS codes, which defines what type of business you are, so that restaurants and live venues, people where they have live music or live performances that have been shut down this entire time, or the restaurants that have been opened and closed and opened and closed, are now going to be able to get more funding and maybe a bigger piece. I believe that is going to be 3.5 months of payroll as instead of 2.5 months. So definitely good things happening there. But again, it's a process, and unfortunately, it's a process that is just not quite ready to start. There's also going to be, so another EIDL availability, which is the loans, but it is going to be based on need as well. And instead of 25% reduction in your revenues, it's going to be a 30% reduction in revenues. And so, of course, they couldn't keep them the same. And now, so, but there, at least there is the opportunity to get some funding there as well. So lots of things to be keeping an eye out for. But I believe the biggest items that I see is the, clarification and that the PPP forgiveness and the expenses, none of that is taxable, and then that the EIDL advance that everybody's been referring to as a grant was really, it's not going to be taxable. It's not going to be subtracted off of your PPP forgiveness. So be patient. Don't get, crazy on approaching your banks right now, because the information they have is as current as what I can get. There's no clarification, and until it's signed, it's not done. And I firmly believe that we're not going to see any of these pieces change that I've talked about, but we don't know for sure. So, but this is something we can look forward to and be able to say, okay, we can change our planning position. We can say, yeah, now it's not taxable. And it is just the timing of it for a tax preparer, for accountants, couldn't be worse. But I'm thankful that they actually got something out there that is in favor of small business. So if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out to me. You can reach out to me here. You can, just through my Facebook page here on ASG or WLX Co. And we will be happy to, answer anything that you have questions about, whether it's about, the unemployment or it's about the stimulus checks or anything, even if I didn't address it today, things you may have heard, stories you may have heard, I still, I kind of go to my sources. Yesterday I spent some time with Journal of Accountancy because, they're the ones that are, lobbying and helping and trying to get these things in favor of the accountants. And that's one of my sources as opposed to, a biased media source. And then also they're starting to have some summaries that are coming out relating to the different pieces that are affecting small business versus individuals, etc. So if you have any questions, feel free. You can post under this thread. Give me, anything you need. Reach out, and we will see if we can get your questions answered. In the meantime, I would say just hold tight. Don't get sucked into the drama of any of it, of all the things that become news. And just know that the pieces that are going to affect you the most, if you're a small business, are not going to be one of those things where you need to worry that that's the piece that's going to go away. More so, you may, if anything, if you're looking at the stimulus money that might be coming into your pocket, it's, right now it's sitting at $600 per person so if you're a married couple, $600 for you and your spouse, and $600 per child. Still not covering adult dependents, still not covering college students, anything like that. But, right now, all of the news is saying, Trump wants wants everybody to have more in their pocket than 600. So right now, just say, okay, I may get $600 and I probably won't get it until at least January. So just don't get too far ahead of it, and then don't go bugging your banks too much. So, really, I just wanted to jump on here, give you some clarification, let you know in a lot of respects, this is good news. We are still going into a first quarter where it's going to be tough. I do not see economic recovery coming until at least second quarter, and probably deep into second quarter. I mean, that's my perspective based on what I'm reading and seeing and hearing. So really just, play it safe, play it conservative, stay safe. I mean, it's one of those things where everybody at this point, I think, has a story and says and knows that they've been impacted in some way by the pandemic, whether it's economical in their business, whether they've lost a loved one. The impact is real. So, but it's going to go on. I mean, we're not done. We're not done. So, in the meantime, I'll come back as soon as we know more. But in the meantime, have a very, very Merry Christmas. I know it's not necessarily the traditional Christmas everybody is used to having, but make the best of it and enjoy, what you have and the family you have. And I look forward to serving you all in the new year. Bye, everybody.